Welcome back to another episode of the MMA Beat. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio on this Thursday, May 28th, 2015. Great to be back. Great to have the A-Team back as well. We were off last week, did a UFC 187. A lot to discuss. Let us get right into it. This is Luke Thomas of the SiriusXM Fight Club and MMAfighting.com. That is Jeff Wagenheim of SportsIllustrated.com. And of course, that is Chuck Mindenhall of MMAfighting.com. All right, guys, I missed you last week. Just for the record,
Don't lie to me.
It is true.
Hanging out with Chris Weidman, you missed us.
It was a great week for all involved in Las Vegas. We'll get to UFC 187 in a second, but let's first talk about Ronda Rousey, Bethe Correia. This is a story that continues to evolve. Yesterday in Brazilian media, Bethe Correia made a comment about, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, that after she beats Ronda Rousey, don't go off and kill yourself because I'll give you a rematch. That's what she said. Ronda Rousey, who never replies to anyone on Twitter, late last night replied to her and said, this is not something you should joke about. Of course, it's a topic that is very near and dear to her. Her father committed suicide, and she said, essentially, I'll make you pay for this. And now, just a few minutes ago, Bethe Correia apologizing to Ronda, saying she didn't know about this past, which I must say seems a little suspect because she's talked about these other things that were mentioned in Ronda's book and interviews, and Ronda's talked about this part of her life at length. What do you make of this? Is this something that should not be talked about in a promotion for a fight? Did Bethe Correia cross the line here?
Yeah, I think it's one of those topics where a lot of times things come up where people say things and do things, and you're like, whatever. This is one of those kind of conversations where you're like, maybe we should have this one. Maybe we should investigate this one. Look, I'll just say, I don't ever hide from it. I'm not going to go into the gory details, but 12 years ago, October, my mother committed suicide. It's been just one of the defining moments of your life. Like, if I don't know what Ronda Rousey's going through, because her situation was different. She was younger, it was her father, whatever. But like, if it's like me, it's like every day of your life. You wake up, it's like the first thing you think about. It's the last thing you think about before you go to sleep, but you never, ever get over it, And so I can see how a competitive athlete like Ronda would want to not use it exactly, but would give no quarter to someone who would even approach that topic. For me personally, when people joke about it, is it painful? I mean, it's pain isn't the right word. I don't know what the word would be. And when people make judgments like, it's the coward's way out. No, you're a moron. Like, no one who knows anything about suicide would ever say something like that. However, I'm not in a position where I feel like I should put parameters on what people should be allowed to talk about. I'm a big believer in free speech is quite painful. And so I'm willing to be okay with that. I would just say, though, that Bethe is going to catch a beating for this one, man. Because if Rousey feels any way like I feel, and if I want it to be retaliatory about it, she is going to catch a serious beating in Brazil. So I can see why Rousey's upset about it. I can see how everyone who's had a suicide in their family might have different responses. I personally would not care so much about that, but the rage of Rousey is about to be unleashed.
Yeah, listen to Luke say this right now. It sort of breaks my heart. And when I've seen Ronda Rousey in interviews talking about her father, I've also felt that. We talk about trash talk, and this is the most guttural trash talk there is. And I just don't think that there's a place for this in sports. I realize that people say things to try to get under everybody else's skin. When Conor McGregor goes out and talks about how Jose Aldo's just like the rest of them, that is striking is ordinary and all that, whether you believe that or you don't believe it, that's one way of promoting a fight. But to take it that extra step and to go somewhere that personal, I just don't think that we need to be doing that. And whether I'm with you. I'm not sure I believe that Bethe Correia did not know that something else. Her choice of words was a little bit leads me to think that somewhere she's heard about this, and I just don't think we need to be going there.
It's crazy to think that you would provide Ronda Rousey with some kind of bulletin board material or locker room material for something like this. And I don't know, I know that Bethe has come out with a tweet saying, I apologize, I didn't know about that. Who knows if she knew about that or not, but that's just not something I think that you should be kind of communicating. That shouldn't be your trash talk. That shouldn't be your mode of trash talk regardless, because even if it wasn't directly Ronda Rousey and her father, it could have been Ronda Rousey and it could be, anybody, any of the fans who, have a story like that. it's crazy too. You mentioned it being sort of an altering thing in your life, something that really goes into your scaffolding. You read Ronda Rousey's book, you realize how much her father's suicide meant to her and who she became. It became part of her control too. Like how she was going to control things in life, and it's an interesting dynamic. I remember during the funeral in that book, she's talking about a fly flying around her father, as he's lying in, and her hating that fly, her wanting to change the weather because she didn't want it to be sunny, things like that. You think about how deep it goes for Ronda Rousey, and you're like, why, Betchko here, putting that out there. It's just, I agree with you 100%. That was probably the worst move she could have possibly done.
Let me add one thing real quick, though. Like, again, it's not, I don't recommend people go up to people who've suffered from this and, like, make light of it in the name of free speech. You have to deal with the consequences of things you say in this world. But, the fight game, it's a funny thing, like, it's so nihilistic. Because whether she should or she shouldn't, she did. And whether it's a mistake or it's not, it's already happened. And my point being is, I hate to admit it, God, I hate to admit it, it's gonna work, man. It's gonna work.
In what way?
I don't think the UFC is gonna latch onto it. I think they have a lot more class than that. But, the fans are gonna talk about it. It's gonna come up in interviews.
This will be a part of the fight.
It's now gonna define part of the pre-fight buildup. Like, and maybe even a dominating part. Like, the cat's out of the bag, toothpaste is out of the tube. And the fact of the matter is, you wish you could say it when something is so grotesque that people would be like, oh, I'm just going to back off. But they don't. Like in the fight game, people, racism has been a huge part of boxing for, God, a century. And it works. Like, how do you ask yourself, how does racism work? I don't know. Well, that's how it works. And it makes you kind of sad to think about. I'm not here to defend it in any capacity whatsoever, but you just can't look at it and be like, did this kind of fight promotion fail? It didn't.
Yeah, and also, Chuck mentioned, when you look at these things in a deep way, well, we also look at things a lot of times in a very shallow way. And think about, you mentioned UFC 187 the other night when the fight begins, the co-main event begins. The Brazilian fans in the crowd start doing that chant that we always hear, that's translated in English as "You're going to die," right? We hear that, but do the people there are they literally calling for Chris Weidman to die, to actually die in that cage? They're saying that you are going down, you are going to be defeated. So, but people don't necessarily think about the deeper meaning of what they're saying. I've said it. I've watched football games and rooted against certain teams and said pretty vile things. And when I'm sitting in the living room with my buddies, this is something that happens. And I think that we do need to examine ourselves sometimes and say, well, this is something we need to stay away from, especially when it's something that is a real life tragedy in somebody's life.
Chuck, let me ask you this: if Ronda didn't have this past, if her father did not kill himself, is this still crossing the line? Frank Mir, several years ago, got in a lot of trouble for saying that he was going to, kill Brock Lesnar in the cage. And we've heard this from other fighters. For whatever reason, Frank got in trouble. Still never confirmed, but it seemed like he may have lost a job, a TV job, because of this. If she didn't have this past, is it still a little too much for a fight?
It's a fine line. It always has been a fine line because we like guys, we like feuds, we like people to be going back and forth. That helps sells a fight. It's all about perception. It's all about building the hype from the promotional standpoint. The fans love it because they want people to really want to inflict bodily harm on the other guy. So it becomes a strange thing. But ultimately, I feel like it's part of your professional, especially at this level. It should be part of your professional attitude to say, is this going to be offensive beyond what I'm aiming at? So to say something like that, I don't know. To me, that's like you're going too far. Yeah. Now, again, though, like he mentioned, he's 100%. Luke is 100% right because suddenly this thing is on the radar. If it wasn't before, now it's on the radar. Now all of a sudden it still plays into the same thing. But I just think from a professional decency standpoint, you should have a filter that works a little better than that.
Even Conor McGregor was like, I respect Jose Aldo for being a family man. He even dialed it back enough to be like, all right, dude's got parents. He's got a daughter. I won't. It seemed like he was sort of circumscribing himself, like I won't go into this territory.
But here's the thing: we're talking about this fight 2+ months before it. There's a lot that we can discuss at the top of the show. So I guess that's what you were.
It's like Rick James, man. The game is all about habitual line stepping. People just step over lines all the time, and there's no real clear consensus about what is and isn't a line.
And I love good trash talk. I love good build-up. But even when Miesha Tate said, if Ronda Rousey submits me via armbar, I'm going to shoot myself in the face. That made me feel uncomfortable. It's a little too much. At the end of the day, we want to believe that everything's at stake, that these people want to win more than anything. But I don't want to think that you're going to die if you don't win. You know what I mean? Like, that to me makes me feel a little uncomfortable, especially when you're talking about fights in a cage.
It's a literal sport.
Yeah, it is.
So they're literally going there to do this to each other. So, the use of metaphors and all that becomes very weird. You know what I mean? Like, so you're talking about a literal transaction between two people. So it obviously translates differently in the sport.
And in this specific case, if Luke's correct, and I think he is, that this now becomes part of the story that's going to lead up right up to the fight. Well, that means that, think about all the interviews that Ronda Rousey is going to do between now and the day that she steps in the cage with Correia. And how many of those interviews are going to include someone bringing up this and having her, not to say that she doesn't already think about her dad every day, but to have to go through it in an interview and have to respond to that just takes, that's where trash talk is not just about that one little thing you say, it's about, it just lives on and on and on.
At least she apologized, but again, I don't buy it. Based off of what she said about Rousey in the past, she knows a lot about this person. There's no chance you didn't know about her father.
But it's good she apologized.
It's good she apologized, but I don't buy that she didn't know about it. And I agree with you 100%. Like, just reading Ronda's response, knowing that she never acts like she doesn't do that, just reading it, I was like, oh my Lord.
It defines who you are as a person. There's no way to lose someone like that. And people don't realize, like, most methods of suicide are quite violent. Right? Like, the person is doing something deeply violent to themselves. There's a measure of, like, self-loathing involved and an abandonment of responsibility. Like, the pain that extends to someone and what it does to you, especially if you are a psychotically competitive judo Olympian. Woo! Betch Correia, you are in trouble. You are in trouble.
And I wonder, is it Ronda trying to finish her now in 5 seconds, or is it Ronda trying to extend this fight for 2-3 rounds to really beat her up?
Yeah, but Ronda Rousey, has become famous for telling people that she steps into the octagon emotionless. Mm-hmm. She fought against her biggest rival twice, and she would claim she didn't approach Miesha Tate any differently than she would approach Kat Zingano, who she had respect for. So now she's going to be going in there against somebody who has dishonored the memory of her dad. Is she going to be able to walk in there and be emotionless? This is a person who already has defeated two of her friends, but that's fodder for the backstory. But this is beyond that, and it is going to be a test to see how Ronda Rousey can perform the way she always says she performs, emotionless, but at what cost?
Let's go back to UFC 187. A fantastic night, in my opinion, for the UFC. I thought it was a home run for them. It was the best fight card on paper this year, and I thought it delivered and then some. Let's start with the main event, which continues to be a hot topic a few days later. Daniel Cormier, is he the real champion? He'll tell you he's the real champion. He says John Jones disqualified himself. He's the happiest man in the world parading around town with that belt. He's on UFC tonight. The belt's there. Everyone's giving him a hero's welcome. And it's it's an emotional thing for the guy. This is a guy who fell twice in the Olympics, failed in January. Now here he is, finally champion. Do you consider him the real champion of the UFC's light heavyweight division?
I want to make one point. You look at the success of this event and this card, you're like, it's almost as if stacking a card to withstand injury or unforeseen circumstances reaps benefits. Who has been saying that for a long time?
Jeff Wagenheim.
Jeff Wagenheim.
It rubbed off from you.
It really is just so shocking. So shocking. Back to Daniel Cormier. Yeah, of course I do. I think he often, I like the way he talks about athletics because he really sort of, his wrestling experience, he can't, extract it from his MMA experience. He always talks about, who shows up to the tournament. And there's many tournaments. He also said, I'm the kid in your bracket, but he was right. Like he said in the post-fight presser, we're going to meet several times. It's not one time. That's what being a competitor means. It means, like, there's guys at my school, my gym, they go on the road all the time to compete, and they win, they lose, and they win, they lose. But that's their lifestyle. And very much Daniel Cormier is that kind of guy. So look, You know, if Jordan Burroughs hadn't had been injured and another Iranian would have won the gold medal there, is that guy not the Olympic gold medalist? No, he's the Olympic gold medalist. He's not the best 74-kilogram freestyle wrestler on the planet, but that's a real achievement. And if John Jones couldn't attend this wrestling meet, he will show up at the next one, and they will hand it out then. I very much view him as, you know, I still think John Jones is the best pound-for-pound guy, but you know, the sands in the hourglass are falling. And the more that happens, the more you get comfortable with the idea of, you know what, DC's kind of the man in charge. And until someone can prove otherwise, and that's up to John Jones to do, I have no problems having him wear that belt. And no matter what happens next, whether it's Bader or Jones or who knows, he will always go down as a UFC light heavyweight champion. That's the thing you can never take away from him. And that, to me, that solidifies his status.
But would you guys have preferred them to give him an interim title? Because we don't know when he's coming back. He could come back in 6 months. He could come back in 4 months. Who knows? I mean, all signs point to him taking some time off. But at least for now, do you think they should have gone that route and people would have stomached this a little better?
Well, if you put up an interim belt for this belt we just saw, then the real belt is still in the hands of John Jones, and you don't want that. He needed to be punished for his behavior. He needed to be stripped of that title. So yeah, so John Jones is out of the picture right now. He's not. He's as Daniel has said. He's not. He disqualified himself.
Yes.
So Daniel Cormier is the champion, but he is in a situation unlike any champion that I can think of. I mean, look at when Johnny Hendricks took the welterweight belt. He did not. He won it because it was the belt was free for him to take. But some people said that he had won his fight against George St. Pierre, but he didn't win the fight. The guy who got his hand raised was George St. Pierre. So there was it was somewhat of a nebulous championship there. But at least he had performed in front of our own eyes, and we had seen him compete at least an even keel with GSP. Some people said he won, some people said he didn't, but it was a close fight. Here we have a guy who just won the belt, but just right back in January, he got pretty much dominated by John Jones. And so that puts him in a position that is unlike anybody else. Look at the lightweight division where Nurmagomedov is the guy who is the uncrowned champion in some ways. He's the guy, he beat the guy who has the belt. So there's a lot of nebulous stuff going on here, but Daniel Cormier is in probably I don't want to say the worst position because he has the belt, so he's the champion, but he's in the position where his supremacy is most easily challenged.
I just don't think you play around with the word like indefinitely. Like you said, it could be 6 months, but it could be longer. And the UFC is trying to sell. I think they hate the word interim, to be honest. Like, they don't want to plug a fight with an interim champion standing there. They like the definitive vibe of a real champion. So I felt like they understood that, and that's why they act the way they did as John Jones gets through his travails. And it also comes down to, does John Jones then, I'm guessing he's going to get an automatic title shot as soon as he comes back. So I think it's fine for them to do that. Going back to your original thing, I also think, Daniel Cormier, he gets this. We all know what him and John Jones, how they think of each other. Daniel Cormier is a very smart guy. I almost feel like there's a little bit of gamesmanship in play. It's directly aimed at John Jones. Hey, check this out. Look who's got the belt. Look who's doing this stuff. Because that's what it sort of seems like to me a little bit. Like he's just he likes giving the little tweet. Yeah, absolutely. So I think he's treating it exactly as he should, because what he's doing is ensuring at some point that you got another big fight between those two guys when he does come back.
And sorry to interrupt, the one thing that I think a lot of fans miss sometimes is that at the end of the day, the point of this game is to get in and get out, A, as healthy as possible, and B, with as much money as possible. And when you have that belt, it doesn't matter how you got it. When you have that belt, it cashes in a lot of chips for you. We know, look, we don't know how much these guys truly make at the end of the day, but we do know that as champion, you get certain perks, pay-per-view points, and a lot of guys have it in their contracts.
The Reebok deal becomes better.
One would hope. Yeah, well, yes, we know that for a fact, absolutely. So, look, this guy is going to be a lot wealthier now because he is that champion, and that's a big deal to a guy who not that long ago was, as he said in the press conference, living with his fiance and their daughter, or their son, excuse me, and they needed his parents to pull together $500 so that he can pay his rent. So that's a very big deal. That's the most important thing for these guys, and this is a guy who's getting up there in age as well. So I think we forget that sometimes. Like, yeah, it's fun to debate belts and these toys and all that, but there's money at stake here. There's livelihoods at stake.
Certainly. And the thing to me that was kind of funny was, like, I heard some people being like, why do you call out John Jones after the post-fight thing?
Yeah, what'd you make of that?
genius, entirely appropriate. Daniel Cormier is the smartest man I know. How could you possibly have any issue with that? What is he supposed to do? If he pretends like John Jones doesn't exist and holds up his belt and like, I'm the undisputed, people are going to be like, they're going to throw rotten tomatoes at you.
How would it have been if he went up there and was like, Ryan Bader?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You have to acknowledge the elephant in the room, but you still want to assert your supremacy, which is fine. And by the way, look, no one is going to go back and watch Jones versus Cormier and be like, well, I think there's a case for DC. He lost. He won round 2. Round 5 was like a 10-10, maybe 10-9 Jones. It was kind of a terrible round. So look, John Jones won that fight, kind of broke him a little bit, taking him down. But Daniel Cormier is undeterred, and I don't know why it's so ludicrous to think. If they fight again, I definitely and unequivocally favor Jones. Let's sort of put that out there. But from a sales angle and from just a realistic angle, what is so crazy about Daniel Cormier being like, you see what happened in round 2? I can do that for 2 more rounds. I can take 3 rounds from this guy, plus who knows how long he's going to be gone. By the way, he's facing 3 years in jail. Let's see how long maybe he does 6 months in jail. What does that do to you?
Sure.
Right? The idea that the next fight is just there's some like this was Alexis Davis versus Ronda Rousey. That's not what happened. He can definitely make the right kind of adjustments, I think, to at least be competitive in that fight. So to me, he did everything right, and I cannot possibly fathom what the criticism of him for this particular circumstance.
And that rematch is one of the biggest fights the UFC could put on now, if they
still
can. And also, Cormier is a different man now. He has now tasted gold. Mm-hmm. He knows what comes with being champion. It's a lot different than the man trying to become a champion. So I would think, he admits that he took round 4 off in that last fight. He's not taking round 4 off, round 3 off, any round off, if they do fight again. And I think that's very important to know.
Of course, in the meanwhile, he had a little WWE moment there at the press conference afterward.
Did you hate that?
It felt a little bit scripted, even though I got a feeling from later on them saying that it really wasn't. It was something that just spontaneously happened. I will say I hated it. I mean, I guess you have to be able to sell a fight in the interim because
Pretty brilliant that he sold 2 fights in the span of an hour.
But I'm not sure how much he was. The only thing they told me it wasn't scripted was that he wasn't really selling it because he was saying, yeah, the UFC, I told the UFC I want the easiest fight possible and give me Ryan Bader. Well, if you're trying to sell us on a Ryan Bader fight, you don't tell us that it's the easiest fight possible. But it did have a kind of it seemed like he was in the glory of the time. The adrenaline was still going on. He saw Bader out there and he went for it.
That clip has almost 1 million views on our YouTube channel, so clearly people were into it. And when's the last time people were actually craving a Bader fight for the title?
This was the only route maybe for Ryan Bader to take, was to do something like this, to basically force himself into a scene like that and to get people interested in his fight. Because honestly, I really don't think he was going to be that guy unless he did something like this. I mean, he's had the last 4 fights. They've all been decisions. And none of them really stand out as anything overly special. So it's one of those things, if his biggest emphatic thing he could have done was to have that encounter when the cameras are rolling with a guy who just got the belt.
Super quickly, what's funny about Daniel Cormier, which I love? The guy's been embroiled in 3 different conflicts. So the Cummins conflict, the Jones conflict, and the Bader conflict. And he comes out looking like a Boy Scout. Now this time there's a little bit of pushback on him, but not really. Like DC is still he's on Fox. He's still king of the town, ambassador for the brand. This guy manages to get in grudge matches and comes out looking clean as.
Tucks in a shirt.
There's something about it.
Yeah, it's just I've never seen anyone who gets down in the mud and never gets dirty. It's amazing.
You know what I say? I say they put that fight on as soon as possible. You do it in Houston in October, just a few hours away from Louisiana. So he'll come off looking as a star. He'll probably get that that big pop from the crowd, and that buys you some time before Jones comes back. You can't wait too long for that fight. But I think it's there's no one else that makes sense, right? And by the way, all of a sudden now you get a fresh slate of matchups for the 205-pound title. If Jones would have been Rumble, honestly, we'd be sitting here and saying, there's absolutely nothing for him to do anymore. There really isn't. If he would have defeated Rumble on Saturday night, there would have been no one. OSP maybe in the future, but he still has to beat Glover, and people aren't clamoring for that. Now you have DC versus Bader, DC versus Gustafsson. Who knows? You might have a Rumble rematch down the line. Who knows? You know what I mean? Just those fights alone buys you time until Jones comes back. So it sucks that he's gone, but it kind of feels like a new day at 205, at least for now.
Well, that's what happens when you sort of set aside someone who's as dominant as John Jones.
Yeah.
Suddenly the field, which was trailing by about 14 lengths in the Derby, now is just nipping on the heels. And really, as good as Daniel Cormier is, it's not out of the question to imagine him losing to one of those guys who could come up and challenge him.
Okay, let's talk about Chris Weidman now. He won in the co-main event, and this was a very personal fight. We saw a different side of him at the weigh-ins, calling him out, calling Vitor a cheater. A different side of him in the post-fight interview as well, telling everyone to join the team, stop doubting me. I thought that was great as well. I mean, a lot of great post-fight promos on Saturday. It feels to me like he has finally turned the corner. People were still skeptical after the first fight with Anderson. Second fight, they were calling it a fluke. The Machida fight, he got respect, no doubt about it, but it was a close fight. He was rocked. All right, nice win. But this one, it feels like people are starting to finally view him as A, a legit champion, and B, a star. Do you agree?
I wasn't in Vegas, so it's a little hard to tell, but it felt like watching on TV that like the real main event was that fight. Partly because the Brazilian crowd was...
and he was the only champion going
right,
into the fight.
That's right. That's right. And he mentioned that in your interview. Yeah. Like, there's 4 dudes fighting for titles, and I'm the only one holding one. I thought that was actually a good point. But I don't know. I still feel like there's a little bit of lingering doubt. I really do. Not much. I think with each successive fight, it gets less and less and less. But people are going to look at the Vitor fight and they're going to do the Michael Bisping bit, where they're like, he looked like he had chicken legs coming out of a female's body. That's Michael Bisping's words, not mine. And so you could say, and I mentioned this on my Monday Morning Analyst podcast, like when he was passing guard, just a quick note, he shoved Belfort's knee to the ground to get to 3/4 mount. That doesn't work on a black belt unless the strength differential is insane. So like, he's clearly ridiculously skilled and strong. But people, I don't know. I haven't seen this moment. He's opening up, and like we did on the mic, he did his raging Ally Quinta bit.
Yeah.
So I think that helps. But I still feel like until there's a Rockhold fight, and not even a Jacare fight, to be honest, a Rockhold fight, because I keep seeing online the same argument they said about Jones before he turned. This guy's beating up old people, which is what a dominant champion does as he takes out one generation and welcomes the next. And so I feel like he needs that young guy like Rockhold to really sort of solidify
They say
things.
the old thing after, though.
What do
You
you
know
mean?
what I mean? He makes them look old. But going into the fight, no one was saying Anderson was old.
I'm not saying it's a fair criticism,
Sure.
just a prevalent one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not buying the criticism anymore. He beat Anderson Silva twice, fair and square. He beat Machida, fair and square, and he just thoroughly thrashed, Vitor Belfort. And yes, you could say you can line up all the excuses you want. Belfort seemed to have about 35, 40 seconds of fight in him, and after that, he had nothing left. Now, part of that is a product of his own life, that he doesn't have the TRT to rely on anymore. But I think part of it, as Luke alluded to, is that Weidman, even while he was making mistakes, Weidman sort of went a little bit wild early in the fight, put himself in danger. It wasn't because of Vitor, it was because he was kind of going after him a little bit, outside of himself. But even despite that, it was like he was against the cage defending the punches, and it was almost like there was like this moment where he's like, okay, I've had enough of this. He stepped aside, and as soon as they separated, it was like, this fight's over. This guy's he's gonna take him down and beat the crap out of him, and that's exactly what happened. It was just, I think it was a transformative performance, and the guy, he's an animal out there.
And he did all this with a bun burning in the oven.
Yeah.
Right?
You are so gross.
I'm just saying. That's what he said. Go ahead. Yes.
Fighting
I was
wise,
like, he's pregnant?
yeah.
Right.
Fighting wise, I mean, it's really difficult at this point to have any doubts about him. I feel like he's really proven himself on every level in the cage. Going back, even to Damian Maia, where he had to almost kill himself to even get in that fight. But in terms of star power, I'm still torn as well because I don't know what it is. It's like there's something almost too realist about him, too ordinary. It's like I just don't think he has like that extra thing that you want out of a champ. I don't know how to explain it 100%, but I saw your interview. I thought that was very good, the one that you did in Vegas with him. He's very open. You can tell he's went through a lot of emotional stuff, but it's almost so like he's such a normal guy that it doesn't translate 100%. I would say that there's some of that in there as well. The other thing would be that he started off, I felt like he wanted to fight anybody. He wanted in the UFC, wanted to fight anybody. He was going to do it. I still believe that. I think like if he could fight John Jones, if he could fight Daniel Cormier, if they offered that fight, I'm sure he would take it, because I feel like he wants to prove he's that good in either weight class. But I get a little bit we haven't seen enough of him. I feel like he needs to fight more regularly. I know he's had these injuries, he's had a lot of fallouts and stuff, but if you go back the last couple of years, we've barely seen him. I feel like we got to bring that in some, and he's going to fight more. So when he mentioned like MSG, I wanted to headline this, that's all good, but that fight is all the way in December, possibly.
Right.
And so to just be like, theoretically, I'd like to do this MSG fight, that sort of thing makes it hard too.
It does feel like they're doing him a disservice by always making him fight on the West Coast. He never gets to fight on the East Coast, except for that fight in Kentucky, his debut. None of his fights have been on the East Coast. I don't even know if Kentucky's considered the East Coast, to be honest.
It is definitely not.
Well, it's the closest, it's closer than San Jose and Las Vegas. Like, he needs a hero's welcome. Unfortunately, he can't fight in MSG, and he really suffers as a result of that. But he needs to fight in Jersey. He needs to fight around where he lives, because I think he'll get that backing and he'll come off as a star.
Related to your interview, because there was many takeaways I have from the interview, but one of them was, we see a guy fight in the octagon, and we've seen Chris Weidman fight, many times in the octagon, and you think a fight is like this revelatory moment where I'm going to learn a lot about this person right now, and many times that is the case. But after a lengthy conversation you had with him, the big takeaway I had was, we saw Chris Weidman many times, and we were working with really bad information about how injured he was, or desperate, or unprepared, not because he wasn't trying, but because life didn't allow it. And so you got a really odd picture of him, and it was only like snippets of him where I thought the Mark Munoz fight was when I first went, oh,
right,
okay, this is different. But you know what I mean? And I still feel like he's dealing with a little bit of that. Plus, then he finally gets healthy, ready, fights someone you think, okay, if he beats Anderson Silva, how do you deny him? And then he has two weird-ass fights with Anderson Silva, where Anderson Silva is doing the Dougie, gets knocked out, and then he breaks his leg like Tyrone Spong. So you're just like, what is happening here? The Machida fight, yes, I think now he's putting that together. So it's consistency. It's fighting on the East Coast where people know him and he can be celebrated. But it's just remarkable to me. He's fought this many times, and only now, in his championship reign, are we like, oh, okay, I kind of get who he is at this point.
Rockhold Weidman, one of the very best fights the UFC could put on. I mean,
Amazing.
That is two guys in their prime, two Americans. It's something different for Weidman. He doesn't have to fight a Brazilian legend. It just seems like two guys who are on a collision course, just looking so good as of late. I hope they do that fight. It's kind of weird that they haven't come out and said that Rockhold is the #1 contender, especially after Jacare just had surgery. I mean, why not put him in the cage or do something at the press conference? Seems bizarre, but anyhow, I want to move along and just quickly touch on Andrei Arlovski, because I think this is one of the very best stories. In recent memory, this is a guy, I think most of us were there when he was knocked out by Sergey Kharitonov, right? At the GP. And I was like, that's it. It's over. It's done. Arlovski is finished. He has no more chin. He can't take a punch. And then to do what he did, to take the shots that he took, and to give him out as well, let's not forget about that, on Saturday against a guy like Travis Brown, this is shocking. I never in a million years thought we were going to witness this, and a lot of credit goes to, Greg Jackson and Mike Winklejohn for doing that. I don't know how they've done it, quite frankly, but in my opinion, he's the #1 contender. He should get that title shot after, June 13th. It's the fight that makes the most sense because he has a name. Everyone remembers the Pitbull. Everyone knows that face. He's from a different era. And you got to strike while the iron's hot here, right? I mean, this is a guy who is on a roll in 2015 in the UFC and winning legitimately. Bigfoot, and say what you will about the Schaub fight, but Bigfoot and Brown are legitimate wins. Don't waste it at this point.
As soon as you said that, that he should get the next title shot, I got this fear inside of me. And it's the same feeling I had Saturday night when he was stepping into the cage against Travis Brown. And it's the same feeling that I got before his last fight. And
is it the Chris Weidman feeling, but while he was walking out?
Yeah. Here's the thing. Here's a little social media tip for you. Sometimes the best tweet you can write is the one you delete. And I was sitting there, gleefully typing out something about how I was fearing for, Arlovski's life stepping in the cage. I just was imagining that he is being led to slaughter. And then, I didn't write it. I didn't type it. I just deleted it. And next thing I know, he goes out there and not only takes the fight to Travis Brown, but then gets hurt and still has the resilience to not get finished, because we know that would have been the end of him in previous fights, and he finished the job. I mean, what a great performance. I'm still fear for him to see him if he goes in against Cain Velasquez or.
We could get Verdum Arlovski too for the UFC heavyweight title.
Yay.
Who thought that would ever happen?
Whenever Stipe Miocic fought, I was convinced that he should get the next title. Now,
So
the one
dominant.
thing that was coming up was Arlovski's fight with Brown. I think most of us probably like, well, Brown's going to win that, and it's going to be like, you know, how these guys, we put the two performances, and maybe you come up with a decision. The fact that Arlovski came in there, I felt like that was the wild card. If Arlovski shows up and he has an epic sort of showing, that would maybe trump him. And I feel like that's exactly what happened. Is Arlovski went in there and probably does this, you know, puts him on skates for most of that round. And I thought the crazy thing was, like you were saying, like you keep thinking, like, we haven't seen him take a huge punch. I haven't felt like since he's been back in the UFC. He avoided, like even Anthony Johnson, who's got all that power, he avoided getting hit too much in that fight. That's what made it sort of boring, is the reluctance to exchange and all that. But he actually took a big shot there. The follow-ups weren't there for Travis Brown. He was already pretty rocked, but he did take a big punch, and he was able to recover and still win the fight. And I thought that somehow spoke volumes for him too, because I felt like you guys did back with the Karatanov and going back, Brett Rogers, all those fights where he was losing, getting knocked out. The feeling was he doesn't have anymore. Usually when you see a guy get the chin, it's like, that's it. They can't compete. It's amazing that he's won 11 fights. Won 9 of them. There was the one no contest, and the one loss to Anthony Johnson was just a decision loss. I mean, to me, that there's nobody who could have predicted he was going to do that. He's a former champ. He's got to be the guy. There's so many storylines now with him going into that title fight.
Yeah, it's funny. Most people are wrong about half the things they say. I am certainly no exception to that rule. But I'm trying to think about things I've been more wrong about. I mean, this is not just being wrong. This is like impressively wrong.
Yeah.
I should get a belt for how wrong I've been about Andrei Arlovski. Incredible, you know. And a couple of points about this. One, someone was on my chat was making a point about it. I want to just repeat it here. You look at some of these redemption stories like Lawler, and Brown's one guy who people thought he was something and became something else, and Anthony Johnson. But there's a lot of heavyweight stories too, right? It's like Frank Mir, it's Mark Hunt, it's now Andrei Arlovski. I wonder if there's something about the fact those guys fight a little bit longer into their 30s that it gives them time to redeem themselves. I think that's part of it. But the weird thing about Arlovski was, like, Frank Mir, for example, had that, broke his femur. Anthony Johnson had to jump up 2 weight classes. These are these glaring problems that these guys corrected for. You look at Arlovski and you're like, okay, what was he doing different in Strikeforce than he's doing now? Like, what the hell is... I don't even know what's different. I've tried to look a little bit of tape. Partly, I feel like he benefits from open spacing of the octagon. Like, you saw him circle out in the Haritonov fight. He had nowhere to go. You saw him do those backhands now, the back fist. So Haritonov caught him on a lot of exits. That was one thing. So you just wonder, was it minor adjustments that, kaboom, had this major impact? I don't know. Whatever it is, here's what he has done. He has redefined what is possible in terms of redemption. Because he didn't have some gigantic, glaring thing you could point to. He just somehow got better, and he stayed with it, and it's truly remarkable.
And let's not forget, when they re-signed him, I think a lot of people, I think we were in Baltimore at the time for UFC 172 when they re-signed him, and people were saying, really? Like, he wasn't coming off.
I asked Dana White, I was like, have you watched any footage of
Yeah.
him? And he said
Like,
no.
yeah,
and
he
I
was
was
like,
like,
it was
oh
Joe
my
Silva.
God.
I remember that.
Yeah, we were in Baltimore, right?
Yeah.
And we were like, really? Like, this seems like a stretch. I thought that this was a huge stretch. And even the shop fight, he didn't look great. And then you remember when they booked the Bigfoot rematch, people were saying this is a pathetic, main event, a pathetic rematch. And all of a sudden, he had shoulder surgery, so he kind of lost a little momentum. But wow, what a story. What a great story. And I think a lot of people still admire and remember him. Maybe it's just confidence. Maybe just having Greg Jackson and Winklejohn in his corner has just given him that confidence that he needed.
Found his waterfall.
Yeah, really. Well said. On Saturday, they premiered that UFC 189 commercial. Jose Aldo, Conor McGregor, they had a press conference on Friday. Dana White, I wish you guys could have seen it because he was so giddy and excited about this. He just kept saying, he replayed it like 8 times for us, and it just kept saying, like, look, I know you guys love fights. I just want to share this with people who love fights. And, that's part of Dana's charm. The guy just really, truly does love this after all these years. I just wanted to get, because I wasn't watching it on pay-per-view. How did it come across on television? Did it feel like a big deal? I know some people were saying, oh, this is kind of a rip-off of the Pacquiao-Mayweather commercial, which Dana addressed, and he said that at first he was dreading that, but then when he saw the actual Pacquiao-Mayweather commercial and how crap it was, he kind of thought it was fun that theirs was infinitely better, at least in his mind. How do you think it came across? Does this feel like a really big deal as a result of that commercial?
Yeah.
Because we've been critical of their promotion in the past, so it felt like we needed to bring this up.
That Pacquiao-Mayweather commercial was just designed so they could put something on TV to let folks know to buy the pay-per-view.
Yeah.
It was just a transactional kind of thing.
But the concept was very similar. Las Vegas, walking.
Yeah, I suppose. Thing. I mean, look, it's a fight in Las Vegas. How many different ways are you going to do this? I liked it. I liked it a lot. I think so much UFC advertising is like, we're gonna get a tire iron and we're gonna beat you over the head with this messaging. And you're like, please stop. I can't take this anymore.
Yeah.
Just highlight after highlight and people screaming.
Yelling,
It's
yeah.
like, are people being burned alive? Like, what is happening here? This is so over the top. This is so over the top. This was so less is more. And people were like, well, it left me like not understanding what to do or what's next. I'm like, that's exactly what you're supposed to feel. The whole idea seemed to me to be, a quiet storm is building and there's this collision course happening. And it was a slow, subtle way to do things. And it was, look, when the fight gets closer, they're going to ratchet up the promotion. But this far out, you don't want to be tire ironing fans in the head with messaging. You want to be kind of slowly massaging it. I thought it was perfect for that. I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate the UFC taking time to make something so quality.
Yeah, it was very high quality, and also I think the message is right. If you're selling a pay-per-view, you obviously have to reach beyond your diehard audience, and so if you're just going to fill a promotion, an advertisement with a bunch of knockouts, you're essentially preaching to the choir. But if you can build some kind of epic quality into into the way you promote the fight, you're reaching out into another audience. You're reaching out to people who might just see this as an event. They're not necessarily the people who are diehard fans of the UFC or MMA in general, but they're people who just like the idea of these two guys facing off, and they're from their two different countries, and they're gonna have a collision course in Las Vegas, and they might not need to see a bunch of knockouts in the promo. They just want to see that there's something
Makes
that's
it
pending.
feel bigger when it's different.
It makes it feel bigger because it's reaching a wider audience.
Sure. And they said they've never spent more money on an ad, and the money that will be spent on putting it out there, NBA Finals, things of that nature. So I think it's refreshing to see finally we're getting a fight that is being put, from the embeddeds in March, 10 embeddeds coming up. They're doing a Bad Blood show about this fight. It's nice that sometimes, even though there's, 5 or 6 fights before that one, we're taking a step back and saying, look, when the UFC wants to tell us that there's a very big fight coming, they can do it better than anyone.
To be honest, I didn't even notice those 189 because there was so many 188 promos ahead of it. I didn't even notice 188.
We're going to talk about that next week.
But I like
funny.
the idea of a guy, convincing everybody that there's a guy who it's inconceivable that he's going to lose against a guy who it's not been conceivable yet that he has actually lost. Like he's been in there, like he's done everything, and you have this guy who just has this self-belief. It's almost like you have two levels there. You have the actual competition, then you just have a mental, a mental thing going together there. And I liked it. I thought it was it was really cool. And I have to agree with Dana on that one. I mean, you watch something like that, and it sort of does get you, and it leaves you in an area of like what happens next with this thing. And
they're also learning. Look what's happened with Ronda Rousey. Once the mainstream discovered who this is, she's everywhere. Today I was on Twitter. I see that Rolling Stone has a story now, and it's the tip of the iceberg. I mean, she'll be everywhere. She already is almost everywhere, but she's going everywhere, and it's not because everybody is really excited about the whole idea of the technical aspects of her arm bars. I mean, people are excited because of her celebrity. They're excited because of who she is as a larger entity, and I think that's where they're trying to go with this.
And I hope this opens the UFC's eyes to a degree, because say what you will, a lot of people are saying that they're favoring Conor and they're putting too much stock in him. But last week we were in Vegas for 187, and in the middle of fight week, they had us go out to the Tough Gym, and he put on an open workout for us, which was, it was unprecedented. I've never been to an open workout for a guy who's fighting in 2 months. It felt like the old days when reporters would go see Ali or Tyson in their, getaway camp, and and it wasn't an open workout where he worked for 20 minutes. He did his full workout. In fact, it felt like we were at the zoo. He would start there. He would
I heard it was 3 hours.
Yeah, it was.
That's nuts.
And he would just do sit-ups in the corner, and everyone's just watching him. And then it almost felt like he was messing with us, because then he'd go to the other end of the gym, and everyone would follow him, and he would do like chin-ups, and then he would go to the other end of the gym. But it was just fascinating to watch a guy on a random Thursday 2 months before his fight and how he prepared.
It's good that they're giving him some publicity too. I mean,
No, but that's the thing. I don't
needs-
mind. If you want to say you want to criticize them for he happened to be there, it was smart. They didn't have to think outside the box like that. And of course, I think, encourages them to do that sort of thing. But what this is telling me is that there are opportunities to make these fights bigger, and they're not that outside the box. I mean, these little things I think are very important. Of course, we like to see them do this all the time. It's expensive, I get it. But no, last week was very fascinating, just being there for a huge fight, but also looking ahead a little bit. And I have an interview coming up with him tomorrow. Nice little cheap plug that we got with Connor that will be on MMAfighting.com. Okay, last topic before we go. I want to talk to you guys about the Reebok deal one more time.
People love it.
This is not going to end, but there's a new twist. Miesha Tate came out with this not that long ago saying the deal was unfair to women. And then Sarah McMahon on Tuesday on the MMA Hour really had facts and figures. Like, she wasn't just throwing this out. Like, she came with the stuff and saying that this is not fair to women because they didn't have the opportunities in the past to fight in Zuffa, Strikeforce, UFC. And so, you know, they're kind of coming in here as, you know, at a disadvantage. And she even, you know, referenced Title IX. She's going to talk to a lawyer, see what her options are. Do you feel like the Reebok deal, as flawed as it may be, is unfair to women right now?
Well, I mean, yes. Like, how's that up for debate?
Well, one could say, I mean, let me not play devil's advocate right now. I mean, we know that it's flawed right now for everyone, but do these women have a point, and do you foresee it changing?
Well, they obviously have a point. And look, I don't think, Zuffa didn't set out to be like, we're going to get those women, like Gargamel trying to hunt Smurfs or something. It was a byproduct, and there's byproducts every which way. Someone reached out to me and I tried to vet some of the information, some of which I was able to, some of which I wasn't. Title IX mostly refers to like discriminating in education related to gender. So I don't know how this is going to apply to Title IX. Moreover, it is illegal, even if you don't set out to like, oh, we're going to suppress wages for this group, or even if you try to like do something and it just happens to have an effect, that is illegal, right? You can't suppress the wages of a protected class, which women are, or at least gender is anyway. But that only applies to employees. Doesn't really apply to independent contractors. So we're sort of back to square one with this. I guess my point is this. Look, whether she has a legal case or not, it doesn't seem like she does. Whether she does or she not, to me, is irrelevant. What she is highlighting is the fact that there's just not enough money to split this in ways that make sense. Like, they only have one criteria for this, tenure. Now imagine the pot was doubled. They could say, well, we're going to work tenure, and then we're also going to work some version of contendership. In other words, Sarah McMahon, you've only been in the UFC for a short amount of time, so your tenure money's not great, but look, you're ranked in the top 10, you will be rewarded for that. I think most gripes would basically vanish at that point. Not all, of course, everyone's going to want more money. But to me, the highlight here is, again, I asked the question at the beginning of this whole process. Yes or no, are you putting in what you are taking out? And there is very little evidence to suggest that is the case, and that's why you're getting these kinds of gripes.
Tenure times ranking times placement on the card. You could have
All
your
kinds
second
of ways.
Right.
What I think it highlights is, just like rankings didn't work alone, tenure doesn't work alone, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the UFC is taking a deal that Reebok that worked out with Reebok, and it's getting the kind of exposure that it asked for in this deal. So the UFC is certainly serving its own interests. Reebok is getting exposure; it's serving its interests. You know, it's really the Fighters Association. They really dropped the ball. You know, the Fighters Association, where they just didn't come out and support the. Oh, wait a second, they don't exist. I mean, I'm not gonna throw bombs at the UFC or at Reebok for this. They worked out a deal. It is kind of asking us to sort of capture mercury under our fingertips to try to find a way in which we can distribute this money in a way that's equitable to everybody. Of course, women have not been in the UFC long enough for anybody other than Ronda Rousey and well, really the two champions to reap a good benefit from this. So that's just a fact. But there were other ways to structure the deal, and in order for that to happen, the fighters needed to have a voice here, and the fighters didn't have a voice here.
I echo everything you guys just said 100%. I think that as soon as the deal and we knew the tier structure, I think that was one of the first things that went through my mind was like, wow, the women are going to really suffer through this thing because obviously they haven't been around. Like, very few of them are probably even going to be in that second tier, if any. I haven't really looked at the numbers, but I was surprised it's taken so long for people to become vocal about it, even though it's only been a couple of weeks. But I sort of felt like that would be the backlash at some point, would be some of the women, especially like Miesha Tate and McMahon, who've had title shots, and that would maybe force them, or at least introduce an idea that maybe we should be looking at how we distribute it a little differently. I don't know if that's even a possibility or if that's going to cross their mind, but circumstantially, they're going to be the victims of this whole thing because they just don't have tenure in this thing.
And also, even if there were a Fighters Association, who's to say that this deal would have been better anyway? Because there are only 2 women's weight divisions. There are a lot more men's weight classes. So women in this mythical Fighter Association would have been, a small minority.
I will say this one other thing. I'm not sure it helped to have Dana White kind of go on record saying, like, well, Ronda Rousey's making $3 million in endorsements, because I don't know, that just, if anything's going to get your dander up, that would also be the case, because you're on the poor end of the whole tier structure thing, and then you hear something like that. And I know that anybody, and this is the great thing about the fight game, you can make that's part of the thing that the sponsorship suffers, is that you're supposed to be able to make it as big as you wanted. There was no ceiling to how much you could make in the sport. So them sort of saying that, and then by comparison, these women in this division are competitive. They probably, Ronda Rousey's a target in a lot of ways, and so I think that didn't help either.
On the other hand, though, Dana White did say, very smart thing. He said these fighters are short-sighted, and he was very smart to say that, because these fighters are clearly just looking after themselves. They're not looking forward to when their careers are 15 years down the road and they're still fighting at age 50. And
Final point.
Yeah, look. Imagine if there was what you had just said. There is a tenure track. We're going to make a formula with that. Placement on the card. You're ranking the division. Something that sort of awarded your success, how long you've been there, and where the UFC values you in terms of your placement on a card, and whether the card's a pay-per-view or a Fox Sports 1. You're not going to get more than you're already getting, right? Like, maybe it would change. Maybe if you were making $2,500, you would jump up to $7,500. But that would alter the landscape for someone where if they were making $10,000, they would drop down to $2,500. In other words, how do you feed all the hungry when there's not enough food to feed them? It doesn't, like, you can make all these different arrangements in origami, and it doesn't matter.
Especially when there was food to feed them
before,
a few months ago.
They were feeding themselves.
Yeah.
So I understand the UFC's argument, like, this is a space we've created, we want to monetize, we want to own this space. I think they have a point about this. But if you were going to own the space, how could you not anticipate backlash if you're not refilling the well to its previous water height?
I wish we could fast forward a year and see if it remains the same. I'm so curious to see how this thing will evolve in a year, 6 months.
Even Scott Coker told me he thinks they're going to do something different about it. Even Scott Coker.
It's going to be interesting. Like all stories in MMA, always interesting to follow them. We love discussing them on this show. We have run out of time. The good news is we are back next week for another new episode of the MMA Beat. And by the way, this weekend, huge main event in Guyana, Brazil. The fight we've all been waiting for, years in the making. Nick Lentz.
Going
up
Charles
against
Oliveira. That's
Charles.
going to be a good one. That's
Literally.
Hey, that first fight was good before the illegal
years
main.
in the making, right?
Yeah.
How excited are you?
Decades.
I'm very excited. I've
The
wanted this
people's main
rematch.
event.
That fight was on Versus.
How many
wasn't it?
iterations have we went through? How many fight camps have we gone through trying to get this?
That's amazing.
Highly anticipated.
I'm kind of thinking we won't get to the fight. Like, it always seems like 24 hours before something happens. That was on the Versus show in Pittsburgh.
The one Nate Marquardt got kicked off of. Wow.
Czech
fun
Congo,
card.
Pat Barrett.
And Charlie Brenneman beat Rick Story.
Yes.
Yep.
It always seems when these two come together in the same room, something magical happens. So that's the case Saturday night in Guyana, Brazil. Nick Lentz versus Charles Oliveira II, and I think some guy named Carlos Condit
Carlos,
against
yeah.
Thiago Alves, something like that. That's on Saturday. Again, we're back next week to talk about that. Anything else that comes up. Thank you so much for watching. For Luke, Jeff, Chuck, I'm Ariel. We'll see you next week. Enjoy the fights.